Crying man threatens to cut off my face. I had two pretty awful experiences in Prague. One of them was just before Christmas when I was staying alone in a hostel. I don't know if he was crazy or if maybe he was on something, but this man appeared next to my bed and threatened to cut off my face. He didn't seem happy about this plan, but he also didn't seem like he planned on backing down from it anytime soon. The year was 2005. I was 25, living in Wales. I hadn't seen Mom in months, so we decided she'd fly over and we'd meet in the Czech Republic for Christmas. We really love Prague. The plan was that I'd fly over, stay the night at a hostel, and meet Mom the next evening. We'd move on to a hotel at that point. I've stayed in hundreds of hostels. Although I've had a few uncomfortable experiences, I never really had a bad one. I found a cheap one right off Wenceslas Square. The location was good, even if only half the reviews were legit. So I flew to Prague, took a bus into Old Town, and found my hostel. The setup was not what I'd expected. It was inside a 4-story building, but the hostel only took up 1 floor. There was no real way to close off the entrance either. It opened into the stairwell, which meant theoretically anyone could wander in. The front desk was visible from the 2nd floor landing. A manager was always meant to be on duty. I didn't see any other guests, just the receptionist. He checked me in and pointed to a room a few feet away. It was a 10-person mixed dorm, but only one of the beds was occupied. Since they weren't there, I didn't know if they were male or female. I chose a bed farthest away. After unpacking a little, I decided to go downstairs and eat. As I was headed down, I passed a man coming up. I wouldn't have paid attention to him had he not paused in front of me and stared. He was tall, probably late 20s, with long, stringy hair. His face was pale, and he smelled like curry. His eyes were big and glassy. Although he looked right at me, I don't think he saw me. I ate dinner at a small cafe, wandered around the Christmas market in Old Town Square, then headed back. My room was still empty. My roommate must have been out for the evening. Because my eyes were a little scratchy, I removed my contacts and went to bed. I'm blinder than a bat and usually sleep in them, but my eyes hurt. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I was awoken with urgency. I thought I was dreaming at first. Someone was speaking very quickly in words that were English but didn't make sense. I struggled to wake myself, but when I went to raise up, I was pushed back into my pillow. Now my eyes were open. He sat on the edge of the bed. Although it was dark, I could see the outline of his long, stringy hair in the moonlight. Something metal flashed at his side. When I attempted to sit up again, he pushed me back, this time pinning my left hand above my head. My instinct was to scream, and I prepared to do so. But suddenly, his rambling came to an abrupt stop as he leaned down to my face and sobbed. "I'm sorry, but I have to use the knife." "Okay," I told myself. "I'm going to be violated. It will be terrible, but I'll live. I'll get through it." "I don't want to," he said, sounding remorseful. "It wasn't your fault. You didn't know you weren't supposed to see." "I can't see anything right now," I admitted truthfully. "I can't even see your face. I won't tell." "You weren't supposed to see it," he shouted. "Don't you understand?" "I didn't see anything," I replied. "I had goulash and dumplings for dinner, and I bought a crystal egg. That's all I've done." "It's not fair, I know. You didn't mean to," he repeated. "But now I have to cut off your face." My heart felt like it would burst from the pounding. "You seem like a nice guy," I said. "I know you don't want to do this. Maybe we could just sit and talk?" He shook his head so violently that the springs under my mattress creaked. "No, I have to. They said so." He gently touched my face and then jumped to his feet. "I don't want to cut off your face. Why did you have to be here to see it?" Surely the night manager had heard that. But when there were no sounds outside my door, I knew I'd have to get myself out. Suddenly, my left hand, the one above my head, felt something under my pillow. My phone. I had an idea. Slowly, making small movements, I slid that hand under the pillow and wriggled my flip phone until it was inside my sleeve. He was rambling again. Nonsensical things about them and honor, and didn't notice. "I know you have to do this," I said. but can I go to the bathroom first? My stomach cramps from goulash, and I really need to go." "I can't," he shouted. "I have to take your face." I thought of my mom, my cat, my boyfriend. It wasn't just my past that flashed before my eyes, but all the things I'd never get to do. "Please," I tried again, "I'll come right back." And for some reason, he let me. I jumped to my feet and casually strolled to the door. I wanted to run, but I knew he'd catch me. I had to make him think I was returning. I thought I'd be safe once I left the room. Even with most of the area a blur, though, I could see the front desk was empty. I was alone. There were 3 bathrooms located in the reception area. He was right on my heels, but I managed to duck into the first one and slam the door in his face. This enraged him. As he screamed and pounded on the flimsy door, I took stock of what I had at my disposal. The room contained 1 toilet without a lid, 1 half-used roll of toilet paper, a flimsy trash can, and a garbage bag full of rubbish. No obvious weapons. Maybe I could use the trash can to surprise him. I had no idea how to call the police, but I did know one person I could call. "Mom," I began the minute she answered. "I need your help." She had no idea what was going on, but she could hear him shouting and kicking the door. I quickly filled her in. "I need you to call the hostel. Someone's meant to be here. Then I need you to get online and find the number for the police." She kept me on the cell while she used the house phone to call the hostel. The man outside was getting more enraged. I could hear him kicking things, screaming obscenities, detailing the things he'd cut off of me, and he continued to pound on my door. The tiny lock wouldn't hold forever. While I waited, I dumped the contents of the garbage can and pulled out the plastic bag. I pulled on it, making it as long as I could, then stood on the toilet to be eye level with him in case he got in. If he got close, I could try to strangle him. Soon I heard the phone ringing at the front desk. My excitement was short-lived, though, as I realized that for someone to hear the phone, there needed to be someone at the desk. And there wasn't. My fear was making it hard to think, and I felt like time was running out. "Okay," Mom said, "I'm calling the police." Just as she hung up on the hostel, however, I heard a second voice outside the door. The pounding stopped. The door rattled on its hinges. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could tell they were arguing. I felt completely helpless. My heart nearly stopped when my would-be attacker emitted a deep, guttural wail. But then things got quiet. "Lady?" The knocking on my door now sounded tentative. "Lady, it's safe. You can leave." When I emerged, phone and plastic bag still in hand, the night manager stood before me. "Quickly," he said as he moved towards my room. "Get your things, quickly." "Where were you?" I sobbed. I didn't know when I'd started crying, but my whole face was wet. "In the back office," he explained, "taking a nap." Mom's call had woken him up. I started packing my things. "No, there's no time." The manager stood in the doorway, casting glances over his shoulder. "Leave belongings. We'll go to another room." "You mean he's still here?" I asked, incredulous. "Where's the police?" "No police. The man is gone," he said, his voice shaking. "But he may come back." Well, great. But like heck was I leaving anything behind. To speed things up, he grabbed my pack while I gathered the rest in my arms. He scurried down a long hallway, and I followed close behind. Socks and toiletries fell from my arms like the trail of candy leading to the witch's cottage. He led me into another dorm room where all the beds were empty. It made me wonder why he hadn't put me, a single woman, in that room to begin with. "You'll stay here," he said. "You are safe." But as soon as he left, I realized that I was not safe. The door didn't lock. I wanted to leave, but it was 2 a.m. I had no other place to go, and I didn't want to walk around Wenceslas Square alone in the middle of the night with my 50-pound pack. And besides, what if he was waiting on the stairs? Or outside? I hurriedly put my contacts back in and set to barring myself in the room. I slid a dresser, a bunk bed, and a nightstand in front of the door. And then I sat up with the light on for the rest of the night, a fingernail file in one hand and an aerosol body spray in the other, my mom still on the line. It ends there. An important note to this story is that it doesn't come from no sleep like many of our October stories have. This is from LetsNotMeet, which is for true stories of less than desirable encounters. That said, the fact it was posted by a writer's account does call it into question. It's also odd that the police don't show up. The mom called them, not the manager, so they should have no way of knowing that the man left. Are Czech police psychic? Are they negligent? Also, while we cut it for length, the original poster included a whole bit about how the call woke her mother up. Her mother is in the States. If this mostly happened just before 2 a.m., that would mean it was just before 9 p.m. on the East Coast, or 6 p.m. on the West Coast. It's not impossible her mom was already in bed by then, but it does make it harder to believe. That said, stories like this are exactly why so many young tourists are discouraged from staying in hostels. I'm sure hostels are mostly fine, but why take a chance on one that isn't? Even if someone just robs you and lets you keep most of your face, that's still a pretty awful trip. But this same OP wrote another story that seems a little more grounded and more of the weirdness you might actually encounter when traveling abroad. But that doesn't mean it isn't still at least a little bit spooky. This took place during her first trip to Prague. If you made it this far in the video, consider liking and subscribing for more videos coming. My hostel roommate vanished without a trace. Many, many years ago, before kids, rescue animals, a mortgage, and a husband, I was a travel writer in Europe. I did most of my trips alone. This story is about the first time I visited Prague. I'd never been to Prague, and the trip was last minute, so I had little time to prepare. My travel partner had dumped me in another country, and I was determined to make the best out of the trip by visiting a place I'd never been. Upon arrival at the train station, I visited the accommodation office and asked for a hostel not far from the center. In my early 20s, winging it was part of the fun. These days, I'm far less adventurous. The hostel they sent me to was a sprawling, crumbling, slate-gray Art Deco building on a nondescript street about a 10-minute walk from Stare Miesto. The inside was probably beautiful at one time, but by the time I checked in, it was full of shabby, mismatched furniture and cheap stained carpet. Most of the light fixtures were broken, leaving everything but the lobby dark and gloomy. It smelled of standing water and dust. I found my room, a double for $12 per night, and made note of the fact that I had a roommate. She wasn't there, but on her side of the room were a suitcase, a dress neatly folded across the back of a plastic chair, a scattering of makeup containers on the beat-up desk, and a stack of German fashion magazines on the bed. As I had no plans or goals on this impromptu trip, I spent the afternoon exploring Old Town Square, the Jewish Quarter, the Wenceslas Square. I purchased some Czech crystal for my mom and painted eggs from a street vendor for myself. I also made reservations for a sunset dinner cruise for one. At around 6 p.m., I returned to my room to shower, change clothes, and unload my purchases. When I left my room about an hour later, there was no indication that my roommate had returned at any point during the day. After the cruise, I stopped at a tiny bar on Tinska and had a glass of wine. I had heard horror stories about the dangers of Prague, but I felt no more trepidation than I did in any other large city. Sure, the cobblestone streets, the fog rolling off the Vltava, backlit Gothic architecture, and winding alleys made me think of Dracula and Jack the Ripper, but in a good way. It was nearly midnight when I returned to my hostel, so I was surprised to find that my roommate still hadn't returned. That wasn't uncommon, though. Backpackers are a fickle lot. She could have gone on a short overnight trip and just left her stuff behind, hooked up with a guy or girl, and was holed up at their place or hanging out at another hostel. So while I was surprised, I wasn't concerned. I took another shower before bed, however, and was surprised to find that things in the room had changed upon my return. Her bed was neatly turned down, the magazines had moved to the nightstand, and the dress was gone. The strangest thing, though, was the addition of a pink, silky nightgown spread across the bed. My bed. Maybe she thought she still had the room to herself? I didn't see how. My shopping bags, clothes, and toiletries were all in plain view. I gently moved the nightgown over to her bed, and then settled in for the night as I wrote in my journal. I assumed she was in the shower or somewhere nearby, so I expected her return shortly. After about an hour, though, her side was still empty. I needed to use the restroom before I went to sleep, so I made one last trip down the hall. The building was unusually quiet. There weren't the regular sounds of chatty backpackers, the clinking of glasses, or music that would normally leak through the walls. There was nothing. It was hushed, like a church after the congregation has left. I found myself practically tiptoeing back. My room was near the end of the hall, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the corridor was darker than before. The few working lights were blinking as they struggled to stay lit, and it reminded me of a funhouse. A tightness began to fill my stomach, and I subconsciously quickened my steps. There wasn't a soul behind me, yet I kept glancing back over my shoulder, convinced I'd see someone gaining momentum on me. The only sound was the soft thud of my flip-flops as they struck my soles. I was flooded with relief as I flung open my door, but it didn't last long. Everything was exactly as I left it, except for the silky nightgown, which was now back on my bed. Sleep came in fits and starts. I left the lamp on for a while, still convinced my roommate would be right back. But the shadows it cast made the room even spookier. It was too dark with the light off. I'd finally slipped into a deep sleep when I suddenly heard the door open. A man stood in the darkened doorway, the hall light behind him showing just enough for me to see his contorted face. "I didn't mean to," he sobbed. "You have to help me." Too confused and disoriented to be scared, I sat up, rubbed at my eyes, and reached for the lamp switch. But once the room was light, I saw that the door was closed. There was no man. I quickly bounded off the bed and went for the door. It was locked. Nobody could have entered without a key. And the hallway? Empty. I passed the rest of the night sitting up in bed, fully clothed, with the light on. Although I'd paid for 2 more nights, I gathered all my stuff at 7 a.m. and went down to the reception desk to check out. "By the way," I said to the 20-something receptionist, "my roommate never returned. I'm a little concerned." She picked up the room key, looked at it hard, frowned, and then glanced at her computer. "What room were you in again?" When I repeated it to her, she looked back at her screen. "Ma'am, that room's been empty for 3 weeks, and it's been cleaned since then. We only have 6 people in the whole building." This OP seems to suggest in the comments that this shouldn't be taken as a ghost story, even though it's very similar to the story where a guy goes on a date with a girl who disappears, then finds out she perished in a car crash 10 years ago. Even the commenters are taking it that way, assuming the man killed the last woman who stayed in that room and that OP is experiencing psychic visions to let her know what happened. Paranormal forces don't really want murders to be solved, they just want to help us write good Reddit stories. However, the fact that someone keeps messing with OP's side of the room does ring vaguely true. It's not impossible that the hostel could have a squatter. I'm sure people try to sneak into these places for free all the time. This is a creepy idea in and of itself. You never know who you're going to be sharing a room with, and when they disappear, you might never know what happened to them. This thought makes every interaction with a stranger inherently mysterious. Everyone you meet, or even come across by proxy, like when you're seeing their stuff on the other side of a room, might be living the last day of their life. You can never really know, which means you'll never know if there's something you could have done about it. Halloween is a time for monsters, whether the slimy kind or the kind that appears next to your bed and tries to cut your face off. It's a time for ghosts, whether of the ethereal variety or the ones who have no idea they're nearing their last breath. Maybe when you think about it, every day is just a little bit Halloween. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.